Welcome everybody to How She Built That. I'm Hazel Stark and I am here interviewing the wonderful and talented Alison Thibault of WindHorse Arts in Vinalhaven, Maine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alison.
Thank you, Hazel. Thanks for inviting me on to tell my story of how I started my business.
Well, it's a super interesting and inspiring story, so I'm sure that people will be fascinated and hanging on to your every word. So let's just dive right in, Alison, and start with the basics. Can you describe your business for us?
Sure. I have a one-woman glass studio and storefront on Main Street in Vinalhaven, where I make really colorful and remarkable glass, mostly jewelry, but expanding into functional housewares.
That's amazing. Sounds like some beautiful stuff. So where did you or how did you come up with the idea for your business?
So my business grew out of real dissatisfaction with how my life was going. I started in my college career. I was in accounting and finance major, and I landed in banking. And I never fit in. It didn't feel right. I didn't like it. It was a chore to go to work every day. And eventually a few things happened that caused me to make the decision to leave that job. And I started looking for anything really to do to earn a living that was more satisfying, more fulfilling than what it had been in banking. And I couldn't land on anything, and everything I started, I went the whole gauntlet from trying to do a consulting business to a dog walking business to I don't know, I pretended I could write the great American novel. There was everything. And then one day I was in an old quarry in Frankfort, Maine, scavenging for some granite to build a garden wall, and I lost one of my favorite earrings. And I started to try to figure out how to make a match for that earring. I didn't even know what it was. I had no idea what the material was. At first, I thought it was perhaps a resin or an acrylic of some sort because of the way it felt. And now this was in the late 90s, so the internet wasn't as available to me as it is now. And I carried that earring around with me for a long time, well over a year, and I would show it to anybody that paid attention to, not that paid attention, but anybody that I felt like may be able to point me in the right direction. And finally, one day I was in the glass shop at the Railway Express, I think, in Waterville. And the woman there was like, "Oh, this is dichroic glass and this is fused." And I thought, oh, I now have names for things. And I bought the books, and I started fooling around with some scrap glass in a kiln. I had a friend who was a potter, so he helped me figure out the whole thing with kilns and how to work them, all of the pieces of it. And people started wanting to buy them when I was wearing them.
Amazing.
How it started. Yeah.
That's amazing. What a creative journey. That really shows the power of anyone can just learn something new and try it on and then turn it into a business. So I often think with people who have particular products that they're selling in their business that they had to have tested that product in some way before, really launching their business. Did you test this concept of these earrings you were making beforehand? What did that look like to kind of have the knowledge base that it was kind of worthy to move forward into a business?
Yeah, so I didn't actively test it, but I guess in hindsight, what happened was because I couldn't make up my mind, because as I said a little earlier, I am a Libra and I do have trouble making decisions sometimes. I couldn't make up my mind what colors, right, to make. So I just kept making more color, and I wore them all the time, and people would comment on them and wanted to buy them. And so that was kind of like my passive testing. There seemed to be some demand. And now, mind you, I was still at this point working 2 or 3 other jobs. but this was really resonating deeply with me. And there was something really beautiful about the act of making something that was delightful, that people wanted to have. So that was kind of the testing. And then the very first foray into selling, actively selling, I did the, I don't even know if they're still doing it, but I did WERU's Full Circle Fair in Blue Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that was a very good experience and very humbling experience, because I went with, I think I had like 3 50 slip receipt books. Like I thought I was going to just sell out. Like I think I sold 3 pairs of earrings. You know, I mean, it was such a disconnect from what I was actually going to end up doing. But, you know, so that was kind of my testing, was just kind of trying to see if there was a market.
Mm-hmm.
And there seemed to be. I mean, jewelry is definitely, you know, on the two, it's both a hard product line to enter into, but also an easy one, because there's so much demand for jewelry if you find the right market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. So it sounds like it was a pretty organic development of recognizing that there was a demand, and especially the fact that you had people commenting on those earrings early on, that in itself helped to figure out, maybe there's something here. So,
and, you know,
yeah, go ahead.
And the other thing too is that, you know, I didn't come into this making of something with my sole desire being to make something, right? That wasn't, I have some friends who are artists who they probably couldn't live if they didn't make something. Like they're the drive to do that. In my situation, my drive was 100% to figure out a way to live better, and live better according to my terms, and have control over how my day worked. So the synchronicity of the two things just was really I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the little bit of magic that was in there. This is what I was looking for. And then this kind of landed, and I was able to really move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That does seem like a bit of magic in there for sure, to have those two things line up just at the right moment. So speaking of magic, I know for any entrepreneur or prospective entrepreneur to start a business, they have got to figure out how to fund the start of a business. And it sounds like for you, there were materials you had to acquire, there was knowledge you had to acquire, there was studio space you had to acquire. How did you fund your business at the beginning?
Well, I had the good fortune to have worked my way through college as a bartender and a waitress, which I think are two fabulous skills to have. So I got another job bartending and waiting tables, because they're flexible and, you know, I mean, it's good work. And so that's kind of how I funded it. I did have enough space where I was living that I carved out about, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 to 15 square feet. Like it was tiny. And my friend who was a potter had an old test kiln, which is very small, that I was able to use and then buy. And I just started. Like when I was at that glass shop, there were 2 or 3 books on fused glass, which is what this process is called. So I bought those and I just started making things, and I kept really good records. And when it came time to make the leap from whether this could just be a really fun hobby to whether this could actually pay my way through my life, I called on my background in banking. So it wasn't all for naught that I went to college for finance and accounting. And, you know, I set up my very favorite thing, which are spreadsheets. I know that's not something you often hear, but I love spreadsheets. And I figured out the cost, and I kind of knew how much I could ask for them on the outside based on all the factors. So I knew, and I knew enough to know that I was going to wholesale, which meant that I had to be able to make money at 50% of what I thought they could retail for. And when I did the math, it worked. So I was like, okay, here we go. And I started to put together a line that I could then bring to retail stores.
That's so impressive. Wow. It is really handy to have that spreadsheet know-how in starting a business. I've talked to so many entrepreneurs who look back and say, if I had just taken that one business class, or if I had just had the opportunity to learn those particular skills, it would have been a lot easier. So that's really handy that you had those, since the jewelry skills especially were new to you. So
Yes.
you got to feel confident in something to start off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like you did a lot of this by yourself. Did you have a team supporting your business or working for you at the very beginning, whether that was paid help or volunteer help or business advisors or family support or anything like that?
No, I was really out there on my own, and not unhappily. You know, there was something really satisfying about, for me, being able to kind of figure this out and create a life that I wanted to live, and not have to not sound terrific, not have to engage with too many other people. Not that, but you know, when I was in banking, I was managing a team, and that's not my strong suit. So when I did start this, I think very subconsciously, I was looking for something to do that would not involve me having to hire people to do it with me. So I think, you know, again, I was doing this in the early 2000s, and there was just less awareness on my part on what resources may be available. And I think that, coupled with the fact that I had some knowledge as far as the business world goes, like I knew I needed a business plan, and I knew how to write one because I had read so many of them. So I did that, you know, and I didn't do a stellar job at it, but I had it written down where I was, where I wanted to go, and how I was going to get there. And I can't say enough about how important it is to have a written plan, period. Secondly, maybe get some cash flow analysis in there.
Those sound like some really good pieces of advice, Allison.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this a little bit already in terms of how you first started to find your customers and market your business within enough of a scale to get that it was probably worthy to really get your business going. But once you kind of assess that, yes, this is worthy for me to start this business and start selling, what other kind of marketing work or ways to find customers did you rely on?
So I had a lot of good fortune along the way. And one of the other things that was really helpful is I had a friend who owned a retail business. So he was able to give me some really good tips on how best to, don't just stop into a shop, like take the time to find the person who's going to make that buying decision, and then make an appointment and respect their time. So I did that. And, you know, my very, very first wholesale account was Grasshopper Shops in Bangor.
So you mentioned earlier that you did some early work in figuring out that you did have a marketable idea by going to the Full Circle Fair and talking to some individual people and figuring out that, yeah, you probably did have a product people would buy. But how else did you market your business or find your customers in the beginning?
So I had the really good fortune to have a lot of good people that I crossed paths with that were really helpful. And one of them was a guy who owned a retail store and gave me a lot of really valuable information on how to approach a retail store to ask them to buy my work to carry in their store. So, you know, the big thing there was to find out who the buyer was going to be ahead of time and make an appointment with that person, so that they actually, so you weren't wasting their time, that there was there's just something more professional about making an appointment and dropping in, that kind of elevated my ask, I guess. And so the very first store that I did that with was the Grasshopper Shops in Bangor, and Lori Schweikert, I think her last name is Schweikert, was the woman who owned it and was also the buyer. So I met with her, and I had my little, oh my God, it was so, I had a piece of black velvet, and I had put the jewelry in, and I rolled it up, and then I unrolled it, to present. So like, I should have kept pictures of that. But anyway, she was really good, and she put a good size order in, and we talked about, all the things that I hadn't really, I knew I needed to do, but like 30-day terms, and what the return policy was, and if I had, some of these other business things that I hadn't really laid out, but she helped me lay them out. So, that was really good. And then from there, I didn't have a storefront at the time. I was working in a very small space attached to my house. And I had done that Full Circle Fair, and then I did the Camden one. I did a couple of outdoor events, and I quickly realized they were not for me. Like, it's really hard to do those things alone, and the mechanics of getting the booth, and they're very expensive to do. The booth fee might not be expensive, but and it is in some cases, but getting a really nice booth put together is not, it's a lot of work and a lot of money to do that. So I knew I was going to wholesale more than anything. Like that was kind of where I went. And so I just kept pursuing wholesale accounts organically like that. Like at this point, I wasn't doing any retail at all. So it wasn't the same kind of marketing. It wasn't until I got my first studio outside of my house, and it was huge. It was so big. It was the biggest space I've been in. Well, anyway, I'm not in a big space now. And it lent itself to putting a store in the front. So I did. And that combination, man, that was the best business move I've ever made, was having my studio and my store in the same physical space. It's just been, I would have nowhere near the breadth of product that I have if I didn't have such an easy way to collaborate with my customers.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you couldn't have planned for that, probably. Like, how would you have known? Yeah.
No, it's been good. And once I was in my own space where I was then doing retail, then I started marketing things a little differently. I did some ads in some local papers, not many though. And in all this, I'm laying it out myself. So I learned how to do Photoshop. I learned how to do some graphics work. I don't know. I could have grown faster if I had hired people to do some things, but there's something really nice about how I grew. So.
That's really nice. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of it was from so much of course, that organic word of mouth from one wholesaler to another, and those kinds of opportunities that fell into place. Has that changed very much in terms of how you reach customers now? Is it still mostly word of mouth? Or are you leaning into other formats?
It's still mostly word of mouth. I want there to be other formats, but it's it's growing slowly. Like, I would really love my website to be stronger in its presence, both with people finding it kind of by doing searches and then wanting to actually buy things on the website. I still find that most of my sales, I'm going to say a good 85 to 90%, like the biggest percentage of my sales, is not necessarily in my retail storefront, but from people that have already owned my work or have been given my work.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
I wonder how common that is among similar kind of businesses in Maine or other places as well, because that seems very unique.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a really beautifully connected customer base that if you think about marketing, like the big scope of marketing and the things I did, well, there was this woman, Polly Beeson, who came into my shop when I was in Bucksport, where my first store was. And she came in and bought, I don't remember, maybe she bought a pair of earrings. And then about 6 months later, she came back in and she said, I'd love to get a necklace to match those earrings I bought for Sue back in June. And I thought, oh my gosh, I couldn't remember what it was. But from that moment on, I kept a written record of what everybody bought.
Wow.
And, I took a class last year on with SURF, which is the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, on how to be prepared for emergencies, all kinds of emergencies. And one of the questions they asked, is there anything in your world that if it went away, it would be, really bad, like that you couldn't recreate? And I'm like, oh my gosh, my customer database, that's handwritten index cards.
Yeah, what a special touch. That really makes your business
Yeah.
unique and so personal. And we know that everyone would rather buy a product from somebody they know and cares about them than anywhere else. So that is really special.
Yeah, it's been probably the best marketing thing I did without intentionally doing it. I think what has happened is because I write everything down when the transaction happens, and then I take it and write it onto that person's card later in the day or the week, that I can tell almost anybody what they own without looking.
Wow. Impressive. Yeah, that's so special. And that sort of leads a little bit into my next question, which is that it sounds like you have done so much of this on your own, from, of course, making the product and designing the business and all these things. And a lot of that was clearly a goal to have a satisfying life that worked for you and your strengths and those sort of strong components of who you are. And so I'm curious, did you outsource anything in this whole sort of life cycle of your business? Were there things that you were like, you know what, this is just not the best use of my time, I'm going to have someone else do this for me?
So there's been a few things recently. Initially I outsourced my website because my first website was done in 2001 and it was old school code, and there was no way I was going to learn that. So I didn't outsource it very far. I outsourced it to my brother.
Convenient.
Who wrote my first site for me. And then, so that was good, because then I got a site, and I've had a site for that long, which has been really good. It's changed a lot, but I had that. And then recently I outsourced my logo design, because wouldn't you know, like I never really had a logo. But then as I got into wanting to do more formal marketing and PR work for myself, I realized I need something that's standard across that will go across all platforms, that is going to kind of tie this all together. And I was having trouble making some decisions. So I hired a guy who does, it's Maine Creative down in Portland. And he put together a style guide for me, a brand guide. And I don't think I could have done it. And it's so silly. I mean, it's not silly, but he did a great job with the logo, and he told me which fonts to use and which colors to use. And I'm like, thanks, it's perfect.
Great. No, fewer decisions on your side. And that is a relief. Yeah. So I just have about 3 more questions for you. And the first one is just, what have been the biggest changes that your business has experienced in its, sounds like, over 20-year history?
Biggest changes. Isn't that funny? I guess, you know, I've moved my physical business 3 times. That in itself is a big change.
Mm.
I don't know that I can answer this question. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, well, of course I can answer these questions. The biggest change, I don't know.
Well, I guess that's kind of nice. There wasn't like a fire that burned down your whole studio, for example. So there wasn't any horrendous giant change in its life cycle. That's
you know what? Probably the biggest change is that I changed my name.
Oh.
And that was actually probably the biggest change. So when I started my business, I was name. I should probably just say it. I was 5 Elements Gallery in Bucksport. And about, gosh, I can't remember now, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I changed my name back to WindHorse, which is how I started in my house.
Mm.
And I never should have changed it to 5 Elements. And, you know, it was just those things. And I thought, well, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I did it. I changed it back. Did
you feel like you lost customers because of that change and people not being able to find you, or was it able to be pretty smooth?
That was very smooth, because the reality is that most people think of it as Alison's Jewelry,
right?
Alison's store.
Yeah.
Which is good, right?
Yeah. You're well connected to your customer base.
Yeah.
So what has been the most challenging part of running your own business?
Oh, I think it's part and parcel, the most challenging, and then the most challenging and the most fulfilling. The sheer magnitude of all the different things that have to get done. Mm-hmm. And the especially if you're doing it solo, just that the sheer trying to remember all the moving parts and get everything kind of all pulled together. And that's also the best thing, because there's always so many things to do. I'm never bored, right? Mm-hmm. If I don't want to do, well, it's generally the bookkeeping that I don't want to do. But if I don't want to do the bookkeeping, then I can go make something. And if I'm having trouble making something, then I can go count things, because I've always got to keep something counted, inventory and all that stuff. There's just always some little things to do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be, what is the most rewarding part? And that it sounds like that's the same answer.
Yeah. And really the best and most rewarding part for me has been the not even the interaction. My customers have been the best and most rewarding part. Mm-hmm. I get almost on a daily basis, I get stories told back to me by my customers about how they've been in a grocery store line and somebody saw the jewelry and it's like, oh, you've been to Vinalhaven, oh, this is Alison's, or this is, it happens all the time. It happens. So that's special to have that kind of, again, personal connection seems to be such a huge part of why your business is successful and also rewarding for you and your customers, which is fantastic. So you've given a lot of great tidbits of advice to people today. And I'm curious whether you have any advice that you received during your entrepreneurial journey that was really beneficial to you. I did. And this was well before my entrepreneurial journey. This was in one of my bartending, waitressing jobs. And the woman who owned the restaurant was Carmelina. And when I think about this, I think about those iconic sentences that land in movies and things, right? Because I that's how I feel with this one. She's like, and it's not that, I mean, it's big, but it's not that big. She was like, systems, you just need systems. In the beginning, I was like, what does she mean systems? What does that mean? I quickly figured out it's systems. And I think that's what's really enabled me to do things as smoothly as I've done them, because I do spend time putting systems in place, what that might be. And when things are sticky or I'm having trouble with something, it's generally because I don't have it well organized, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and just the other piece of advice that's landed with me from quite a few people is just to really, I don't know, just breathe, like have fun, just have fun with it. It's not supposed to be awful.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not.
No, why would you do it if it's not awful?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
awful,
it's supposed
right?
to be, it's supposed to, this is, and it feels good. Like I feel really, that's not to say this is all like Pollyanna and oh my gosh, everything's just so, optimistic and everything. I mean, there's been lots of downtime of not one, it was only probably 10 years, maybe even 8 years where I haven't had to work 2 or 3 other jobs, right? That this now can support itself and that I've created something that this is what I do. So that feels good, but that's a long, it's hard work, but there hasn't been a day that I've gotten up and not wanted to do the work, whatever that might be for the day.
Well, I think anyone can
take time off, but there's never a time when I'm like, God, do I have to go into the studio? Never, not once, 20 some years.
Yeah, if we could all be so lucky, right, with our daily lives. It sounds like you did build the life that you were trying to build at the beginning.
Yeah, somebody asked me a while ago, how would you like to introduce yourself? How would you, what's the one thing you would want people to know about you? And so I thought about that. And I think the one thing is to, and I think it was Thoreau's quote, that I went confidently in the direction of my dreams and I am living the life I imagined.
Well, that's a perfect way to conclude how she built that Alison Thibault edition of WindHorse Arts, which folks can visit your store in person on Vinalhaven Island here in Maine or through your website. Can you share what your website is?
Sure, windhorsearts.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Alison. I look forward to checking out your jewelry in person someday.
Thank you. Yes, it would be nice to meet you in person after all the time we've spent together.
I know.